Let me just begin by saying, yes, I'm wearing Birkenstocks and socks up here. I think I fractured my toe last month and it came back to haunt me. Can everybody hear me? Before I begin, thank you to everybody who invited us to be here, the staff, everybody at the restaurant, at the inn itself, all the poets, all the faculty members. Please give yourself a big round of applause. Thank you. I once dreamed of being a game show host as a boy, and slightly coming true. I'm going to begin with 3 poems that are new. I wrote post second book. And to jumpstart the writing process, I often give myself constrictions, and these are 14-line poems. I'm not calling them sonnets because I'm not delusional. That's going to come back and haunt me. I just know it one day. Lines written during my second pandemic. All water flows toward loneliness. Loneliness is a black eye, a gleaming pit. We have yet to spit loneliness like an atom. Loneliness arrives on a leash of scorpions. Inside my skull, loneliness opens like a parachute. It's illegal to chain loneliness to a fence. Flickers tunnel through loneliness to build a nest. I sprinkle a spoon of sugar over loneliness. In some languages, loneliness is imperfect. Antlers crown the bald head of loneliness. Like rough trade, loneliness won't kiss you. Loneliness is crouched in a tree, afraid of dirt. In the dark, loneliness ripens too quickly. Beneath the roof of loneliness, my blood drifts. Okay. Lines written during a shortage of face masks. I now consider myself the CNN of American poets, bringing you the news. If there is blood in my mouth, it must be love. The body, like a thought, branches. After my lover died, I began to thrum. Green ache, green release. Music crawls out of my left ear like a scorpion. In a parallel universe, I'm faithful. The tip of your tongue, peeled garlic. Afterwards, whiskey. You want fruit? Look in a mirror. Not all wounds are arenas. The color green in the desert is a cathedral. At night, windows weep like widows. I sleep with a scrap of velvet on my face. One unreadable sentence stitched in blue across the fabric. I was born and raised in southern Arizona, and in southern Arizona and northern Mexico, we have a lot of saguaro, large columnar cacti, column-like, and it takes 100 years for the first arm/branch to grow. To a blossoming saguaro. You have kin in Mexico. Shooting you is called cactus plugging. Humidity and wind speed shape the path of a bullet. Your shadow will outlive my father. That's kind of comforting. Ghost-faced bats pollinate your dog-eared flowers, which smell like wet rope, melon. The sky is a century with no windows. I say things like that. Sorry. You have more rights than the undocumented. I need a permit to uproot you. Ofelia Cepeda believes only rain can touch all of you. My mother is my favorite immigrant. After her, the sonnet. I'm going to read 2 or 3 poems from Slow Lightning, my first book, which came out in 2012. Thank you. My royalty check thanks you. My mom, good things started happening to me. Everything I say, I'm doing this, I'm going there. Her first question is, how much are you getting paid? And even worse, she keeps asking me day after day when we talk on the phone, how's the writing coming along? This poem is titled, In Colorado, My Father Scoured and Stacked Dishes in a Tex-Mex Restaurant. His co-workers, unable to utter his name, renamed him Jalapeno. If I ask for a goldfish, he spits a glob of phlegm into a jar of water. The silver letters on his black belt spell sangron. Once, borracho at dinner, he said, Jesus wasn't a snowman. Arriba Durango, arriba Orizaba. Packed into a car trunk, he was smuggled into the States. Frijolero, greaser. In Tucson, he branded cattle. He slept in a stable. The horse blankets, oddly fragrant, wood smoke, lilac. He's an illegal. I'm an illegal American. Once, in a grove of saguaro at dusk, I slept next to him. I woke with his thumb in my mouth. No que no tornabas, pistolita. He learned English by listening to the radio. The first 4 words he memorized, in God we trust. The 5th, percolate. Again and again, I borrow his clothes. He calls me Scarecrow. In Oregon, he picked apples. Braeburn, Jonah Gold, Cameo. Nightly, to entertain the cuates around a campfire, he strummed the guitarra, sang corridos, arriba Durango, arriba Orizaba. Packed into a car trunk, he was smuggled into the States. Greaser, beaner, once, borracho, at breakfast, he said, the heart can only be broken once, like a window. No mames. His favorite belt buckle, an águila perched on a nopal. If he laughs out loud, his hands tremble. Bugs Bunny wants to deport him. Cesar Chavez wants to deport him. When I walk through the desert, I wear his shirt. The gaze of the moon stitches the buttons of his shirt to my skin. The snake hisses. The snake is torn. And I meant to say that before I read the poem, but I want to dedicate that poem to Luis Alberto Urrea, who made a lot of things possible for the next generation, and who I came to know first as a poet, the fever of being and ghost sickness. Gracias, Luis. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I approach a harp abandoned in a harvested field. A deer leaps out of the brush and follows me in the rain. A scarlet snake wound in its dark antlers. My fingers curled around a shard of glass. It's like holding the hand of a child. I'll cut the harp strings for my mandolin, use the frame as a window in a chapel yet to be built. I'll scrape off its blue lacquer, melt the flakes down with a candle and ladle, and paint the inner curve of my soup bowl. The deer passes me. I lower my head, stick out my tongue to taste the honey smeared on its hind leg. In the field's center, I crouch near a boulder, engraved with a number, and stare at a gazelle's blue ghost, the rain falling through it. Okay, one more poem from this book. The last poem I wrote for this book, after I got the phone call from Mr. Phillips, and I went home and I went through 9.5 boxes of notebooks and said to myself, man, there's a lot of good language here. Why don't you just stitch what you like into something, right? So this is how the self-portrait came to be, me trying to salvage every last line and phrase I thought was worth putting in the first book. Self-portrait with tumbling and lasso. I'm drumroll and voyeur. I'm watermark and fable. I'm weaving the snarls of a wolf through my hair like ribbon. At my feet, chisels and jigsaws. I'm performing an autopsy on my shadow. My ribcage a wall, my heart a crack in a wall, a foothold. I am tumbling upward, a French acrobat. I am judder and effigy. I am pompadour and splendid. I'm spinning on a spit, split in half, an apple in my mouth. I know what Eve didn't know. A serpent is a fruit eaten to the core. I'm a massacre of the dreamers, a terracotta soldier waiting for his emperor's return. When I bow, a black fish leaps from the small of my back. I catch it, I tear it apart. I fix the scales to my lips. Every word I utter is opalescent. I'm skinned and Orphic. I'm scarlet and threshold. At my touch, a piano melts like a slab of black ice. I'm steam rising, dissipating. I'm a ghost undressing. I'm a cowboy riding bareback. My soul is whirling above my head like a lasso. My right hand a pistol, my left automatic. I'm knocking on every door. I'm coming on strong like a missionary. I'm kicking back my legs like a mule. I'm kicking up my legs like a showgirl. And don't beg to watch me dance like a showgirl with a fractured toe. It'd be just too cruel of a spectacle and too cruel for me. I'm just going to end with 3 poems from Guillotine, my second book. And man, writers who are working on the first book, it gets harder. The heart of the second book, one of the hearts of the second book is unrequited love. What do you do with that energy when you fall and desire somebody who can return that? I didn't want a restraining order, so I returned to poetry. This poem is titled Autobiography of My Hungers, which is a memoir by my mentor, Rigoberto Gonzalez. His beard, an avalanche of honey, an avalanche of thorns. In a bar too close to the Pacific, he said, I don't love you, but not because I couldn't be attracted to you. Liar, even my soul is pot-bellied. Fitness in my mind equals the game in on the nightly news. Kissed by death and public scorn. The anchorman declaring weight loss is one of the first symptoms. The Portuguese have a word for imaginary, never to be experienced love. Whoop-de-doo. I don't love you, he said. The words flung him back. In his eyes, I saw it, to another bar where a woman sidestepped his desire. Another hunger, our friendship. In 10th grade, weeks after my first kiss, my mother said, you're looking thinner. That evening, I smuggled a cake into my room. I ate it with my hands, licked buttercream off my thumbs until I puked. Desire with no future, bitter longing. I starved myself by yearning for intimacy that doesn't and won't exist. Holding hands on a ferry, tracing with the tip of my tongue a jawline. In a bar too close to the Pacific, he said, I don't love you, but not because I couldn't be attracted to you. His beard, an avalanche of thorns, an avalanche of honey. I'm going to end with one more poem. And thank you so much for your attentiveness. And thank you to especially the participants in Monica's and mine workshop. Thank you. Questions for my body. Why are you nocturnal? How many cathedrals have you entered? Has cruelty ever saved you? Do you remember the length of his thumbs? Isn't that enough cake? Have you ever soaked your feet in gasoline? Do you still fear the virus? How can you sleep in this heat? Is that a soap patch? Did you laugh or cry at Keith's grave? Have you been claimed? Gracias. And now, Katie Kitamura.
Hi, Eduardo, that was extraordinary. I feel so lucky to be reading with you, and I feel lucky to be in a room with all of you. I'm super aware that I'm kind of all that stands between you and the dance floor. So I'll try to keep this relatively short, but I really do want to thank Leah and Gwen and Adam and all the extraordinary staff. I never knew until I came to Sewanee that writers could be so competent and so organized, and it has been an extraordinary conference, so thank you so much. And I want to thank Chris and our amazing workshop. I've learned so much from all of you over the past 2 weeks, and I'm profoundly grateful. I'm reading from a book that I published last year called Intimacies, and I will be reading I'll be reading 2 sections. They both involve the central character being told a story, so they're kind of about storytelling a little bit. And the novel is about a simultaneous interpreter who moves from New York to The Hague to take a job working at a war crimes tribunal that is kind of loosely based on the International Criminal Court. And I think that's, as they say, all you need to know. So this first one is told to her by a colleague. As I sat down at my desk, I recalled an anecdote Amina had told me not long after I arrived at the court. It was a story I thought of often. She had been tasked with interpreting for the accused, working in Swahili, and was briefly the only interpreter on the team with adequate fluency to perform the task. Her booth partner did not have a strong grasp of the language and said in private that her mind had drifted during the lengthy sessions. She listened to the originating English and French, but less closely to Amina's interpretation. But Amina herself was under considerable pressure. She was negotiating marathon sessions that were far longer than standard. She sat in the mezzanine level booth, the accused positioned directly below her in the courtroom. He was still a young man, a former militia leader, wearing an expensive suit and slouched in an ergonomically designed office chair. He was on trial for hideous crimes, and yet he simply looked as he sat, sullen and perhaps a little bored. Of course, the accused are often in suits and in office chairs, but the difference lay in the fact that at the court, the accused had not merely been dressed up for the occasion, but were men who had long worn the mantle of authority conveyed by a suit or uniform, men who were accustomed to its power. And they had a kind of magnetism, in part innate and in part heightened by the circumstance. The accused had an aura when they were brought to The Hague. We had heard a great deal about these men, and they were almost always men. We had seen photographs and video footage, and when they finally appeared in the court, they were the stars of the show. There was no other way of putting it. The situation staged their charisma. In the case of this particular man, he was not only young and undeniably handsome, but he had a dazzling air of command. Even without the aid of the courtroom, it was easy to see why and how so many people had obeyed his orders. But it was not even this, Amina explained. It was the intimacy of the interpretation. She was interpreting for one man and one man alone, and when she spoke into the microphone, she was speaking to him. Of course, she had known when she accepted the post in The Hague that the substance of the court would be darker than the United Nations, where she had previously been working. After all, the court concerned itself exclusively with genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. But she had not expected this kind of proximity. Although she was never face to face with the accused and was always safely ensconced behind the glass-fronted interpreter's booth, she was constantly aware that she and the accused were the only two people in the courtroom who understood the language she was speaking. Over the course of those first sessions, Amina grew increasingly uneasy. The case involved a great deal of testimony regarding atrocity, and hour by hour, she carried this testimony from one language into another. She found herself on occasion struggling to control the tremor in her voice. She felt herself becoming entirely too emotional. But then, as quickly as the second day, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, a certain hardness overtook her. She discovered a new and acerbic tone, not exactly neutral, perhaps even reproachful. At one point, as she relayed the details of an embezzlement scheme, something that was morally questionable, but a trifle compared to the other charges against the man, she found herself using a voice of cold disapproval, as if she were a wife scolding a husband for some small domestic failing, neglecting to do the dishes, for example, rather than addressing his rampant infidelity or the fact that he had gambled away their life savings. At that moment, to her surprise, she saw the accused turn his head and look up in the direction of the interpreters. Until this point, he had sat almost entirely still, staring straight ahead, as if the proceedings had nothing to do with him, as if the entire matter were beneath him, although the result, Amina thought, was not the appearance of dignity. Rather, he looked like a sulky teenager, being reprimanded for some infraction for which he refused to repent. There were perhaps half a dozen interpreters seated in the mezzanine-level booths. It was unlikely that he would know which one of them was his. She had never before noted him observing them. She forced herself to keep her voice steady and focus on the job at hand. The last thing she wanted to do was get distracted. Nonetheless, she was unable to keep from surreptitiously watching the accused as his gaze swept the glass-fronted booths. Perhaps feeling her eyes upon him, he suddenly stopped and looked directly at her, turning in his chair in order to do so. Amina couldn't help it. She stumbled over her words, apologized, nearly lost the thread of what was being said. He continued to stare at her, a grim expression of satisfaction settling into his handsome face, perhaps because he had succeeded in intimidating her, in causing her to falter. She felt at once, even through the glass wall dividing them, the totality of the man's will. She shivered and looked down. She resumed interpreting, scribbling on her pad as if making notes. When she looked up again, he had turned and was looking straight ahead once more, his face soft and brooding. He never looked at her again. However, she found that her voice had shifted. Despite herself, she had been cowed. The next time she was required to recite a litany of the horrific acts perpetrated by the accused, her voice took on a pleading tone, in response to which the accused gave a thin smile. Somehow, she had become uncomfortable with the idea of confronting this man with his crimes, these heinous accusations that she was not herself making, but was simply interpreting on behalf of the court. "Don't shoot the messenger," she almost added, before remembering that this was precisely the kind of thing that the accused did. It might even have been on the list of crimes, actually shooting the messenger. Although she knew there was nothing the man could do to her, she could not deny that she was afraid. He was a man who inspired fear. Even while sitting immobile, he radiated power. Still, it was not primarily fear that she felt, but guilt. She felt guilty toward the accused, who not only was a terrible person, but a man for whom she bore no responsibility, apart from adequately interpreting what was said in the courtroom and doing her part to ensure that he received a fair trial. She bore no responsibility for his happiness. She doubted that the man had been happy since he had been taken into custody by the court. He was a man entirely without morals, and yet the sentiment she felt toward him was moral in nature. It was illogical. It didn't make any sense. She concluded that it was a man's magnetism, which had persuaded thousands of people to commit terrible acts of violence. Again, there was nothing bureaucratic or banal about him. He was a leader in every sense of the word, she thought, as she leaned toward the microphone and continued to interpret steadily and without pause. He didn't turn to look at her. He never did again after that instance. But it was, she thought in retrospect, her first encounter with evil. So I sat with Leah at lunch, and she told me to read a dinner party scene. And I don't know. I guess I just do what Leah tells me to do. So this next sequence is a little dinner party. There's not too much you need to know. It's the central character has gone to have dinner with two people she doesn't know very well. They're siblings. They're twins, called Anton and Aline. Anton works in an antiquarian bookshop and was recently assaulted, although that's moderately relevant to this passage. "Sit down," Anton suddenly said to me. He gestured with his wineglass to the chair beside him. I would have rather joined Aline behind the counter, but he was not a man whose injunctions were easily ignored. I sat down obediently. He exchanged glances with Aline, then reached for an empty glass and poured me some wine. "Anton is in a bad mood," Aline said. She said this in a manner that was entirely matter-of-fact, as if it were neither unusual nor particularly serious. "A deal gone bad?" she asked. She was no longer really paying attention. She had turned back to the stove. He shrugged and watched me as he sipped from his glass. "Just trying to clear up the mess made in my absence," he said. "That idiot Vincent let go of some good first for next to nothing, and the inventory's in total disarray. I work in books," he added, by way of explanation. "Anton has a beautiful shop in the old town," Aline said. "Yes," I said automatically. "I've been there." I felt Anton's eyes slide toward me. "Did you buy anything?" he asked casually. "Yes," I said. "In fact, I spent more than I intended. I was looking for a gift for someone." I laughed, too loud and nervously. He nodded. "Most of the sales are online, of course," he said, "but the storefront is more important than you might think. Just the other day, a man walked in and asked for 40 meters. Aline looked up. 40 meters of what? "Leather and gilt," he said. "Old-fashioned, classic." "Ah," she said, "an interior designer." He could only speak in the language of his mood board. It was really extraordinary. Tobacco, royal blue, plush, traditional. I asked him if he was interested in a particular author or a particular genre, but no. "These books aren't for reading," he explained. "They're for creating a look, an atmosphere." Anton waved a hand before his face as if to evoke a delicate perfume. He dropped his hand. Of course, we were happy to oblige. 40 meters of books is a great many books, tens of thousands of euros worth of books, and he truly didn't care in the least what was inside them. A kind of Jay Gatsby, if you see what I mean. "Goodness," murmured Aline. I could see that she had lost interest in the story. "But that's not all," he added hurriedly. "That's not the end." She looked up. He had her attention again. "We sold him a lot of worthless junk, subscription editions, encyclopedias, remaindered monographs, that kind of thing. The price is only very slightly inflated, of course." He grinned, so that we knew the opposite was true, and I saw Aline glance at me, perturbed. "And the point is," she murmured. The point is you're always hastening toward the denouement, Aline," he said irritably. "It's very tedious of you." "Yes, I know," she said, her hands resting on the countertop. She looked at me with a smile. "Anton loves to tell stories. He loves digressions. He takes longer to tell a story than anyone I know, although it's true that digressions generally do have a point, at least eventually." She paused and looked back at her twin. "Go on, then." He gave an elaborate sigh and leaned forward. He continued to address Aline, but his gaze was on me, his body turned in my direction. "Last week, I went to Lars and Lotte's new house for the first time. Of course, they bought the house nearly a year ago, but we generally meet in restaurants or bars. Lotte doesn't like to cook, but this time, they invited me to their house. Given the circumstances, they thought I would be more comfortable there." There was a hard edge to his voice, and Aline frowned and then said, "But they were right, Anton. It is far more comfortable for you to be there." "I don't mind people staring." "It's not a question of people staring. Anyway, I always prefer to eat at someone's home. That's why." And she looked at me apologetically. "We're here tonight." Let me finish my story. Of course. Anyway, I was very conscious of the fact that I was being invited to their new house for the first time. Miriam was away, so I went to the fancy deli and bought a bottle of wine and some chocolates. I don't know, usually it's Miriam who handles these things, but as I've said, she was away. Aline was looking at him with an expression that was troubled, and I wondered where Miriam was now. So I arrived with my chocolates and my bottle of wine, neither of which seems entirely right. Even from the outside, the house is tremendous. Enormous, a 19th century townhouse, but with glass cubes affixed to the facade in random places, almost like postmodern growths. Inside, the house is even more impressive. It's one of those new smart houses with solar panels and a self-watering green roof to regulate the temperature, an atrium through the middle of the house, everything synced up to an iPad. I have no idea how they got the permits to do such things. Aline was bringing bowls of soup to the table. Anton barely paused as he picked up his spoon, took a mouthful of soup, and reached for some bread. She set her own bowl down and sat down across the table from him. She looked at me. "Cheers," she said dryly. He nodded in acknowledgement of the food, eating with extraordinary gusto and speed, and then continued. I thought, I knew they were doing well, but I didn't realize they were doing this well, and I wasn't surprised they hadn't invited anyone over yet. Lotta nervously explained that the house wasn't finished. She said they would have a housewarming party as soon as they had fully moved in, and then suddenly added something about buying the house because it had such a good space for entertaining. They would be able to host fundraisers and charity events. I nodded. They were clearly embarrassed by the incontrovertible evidence of their wealth, which has crossed over from the merely excessive to the truly obscene, without any of us really noticing. But we all knew they were doing well, Aline said. She turned to me. Lars is a property developer. He's responsible for those new apartments around the old train station. I nodded. I thought that Lars would have been a controversial figure in some circles, and I wondered if this was why he had kept so quiet about the expansion of his considerable fortune. Aline had used the word responsible, although that didn't necessarily imply any particular judgment on her part. She had spoken neutrally enough. Yes, Anton said, I knew they were doing well. He turned to address me and said by way of explanation, the money is from Lotta, who is as stupid and bourgeois as her name, but Lars is different. He's a cunning animal, and he's turned all that nice old money into a real fortune. He laughed. You know, those buildings he's put up are a total monstrosity from an aesthetic point of view, as well as a moral one. I haven't seen them, Aline said. Haven't you? Anton said. She looked away. Anyway, Anton continued, this house, it was a far cry from the monstrosities he's built his fortune on. When it's a question of his own living environment, he knows how to feather his nest. He pressed on. Despite a certain initial coyness in their manner, I quickly realized that they were actually quite excited to be showing off their home. They dragged me from room to room, showing me the vast expanses of marble, the custom light fittings, the restored tile on the fireplace. I assure you, once they hit their stride, they were perfectly sanguine about hauling me up and down the stairs. Anton, Aline said in protest. Let me finish, Anton said. So, Lars and Lotta are dragging me all over the house, the kitchen, the pantry, the guest room, even into their bedroom, for Christ's sake, with the king-size bed and the frette linens and the foul stench of bourgeois sex, which is, of course, the most perverse sex of all, when Lotta opens a final door and says in a voice of particularly shy triumph, oh, I do like Lotta. It's not her fault. She's so stupid. And this is a library. Oh, no. I blinked. Anton gave Aline something of a stern look and then turned back to me and hurried on. She ushered me into the room. It's impossible to know if she was truly proud of the room or if she simply imagined I would like it because of my profession. But in any case, I was truly gobsmacked. My jaw dropped open. Before me were the meters and meters of books that had been requested by the idiotic interior designer, the encyclopedias, and the remainder monographs, the whole moronic collection that we had sold to that fool at triple, quadruple, quintuple the value, neatly arranged on the built-in shelves. I started laughing. I stood in the middle of the library and I laughed, and after a moment Lotta became quite worried and asked whatever on earth was the matter. I recovered enough self-control to assure her that it was only that I was overwhelmed with delight. Never in my life had I seen such a beautiful library. She wasn't immediately convinced. I'm known for a certain amount of irony. I could see she was wondering if I was making fun of her. That's horrible. Don't worry, I did convince her in the end. We came downstairs. Lars had gone back into the kitchen some time ago to check on the food, and she positively trilled out to Lars, Anton loves the library. He said it's the most perfect library he's ever seen in his life. Lars looked at me. I could see in his face that he knew. Not that I'd sold him the books. Lars would not have been the one to deal with the interior designer, but he knew that I'd been mocking Lotta. The rest of the dinner, he couldn't even bring himself to look in my direction. He had nothing but contempt for me. But Lotta was in excellent humor, and I saw him give her a look of such tenderness, such deep affection and love. He had slowed at last, and now he looked up at Aline. They do love each other, you know. Despite all the money, Lars would kill for Lotta, I'm sure of it. Kill me, if it came down to it. Aline shook her head and rose to her feet. Are you done? She asked with a smile. I nodded, and she began clearing the table. At any rate, she said to Anton, you don't come off very well in that story. I never think about coming off well in a story, he said calmly. That you have to give me. Thank you.